What if war doesn't just defend a nation, but quietly transforms it into something it was never meant to become? Not only what it does, but what it becomes. We often think of the state as something necessary, a structure that protects society, maintains order, defends against threats. But what if that's only part of the story? What if the state is something else? In a short but powerful essay, Murray Rothbard asks a simple question: what is the state? Not what it claims to be, because what it claims to be is often how we justify it, but what it actually is. Rothbard's answer is direct. The state is that organization which attempts to maintain a monopoly of the use of force, not a neutral institution, not simply a provider of services, but unlike every other institution in society, it obtains its revenue not by voluntary exchange, but by coercion. To understand this more clearly, Rothbard draws on a deeper distinction. There are two ways to acquire wealth: the economic means, production and exchange; the political means, taking, coercion. In the state, he argues, is the organization of the political means, which means it does not simply procure, it redistributes through power. But force alone is not enough, because a small ruling group cannot dominate a population indefinitely through force alone. Rothbard makes this clear. The state must secure the acceptance of the majority, or it cannot endure. So it must do something more subtle. It must persuade. And this is where Rothbard introduces a crucial idea. The state relies on a class of people, the opinion molders of society, intellectuals, educators, writers. Institutions that shape how people understand the world, the people who shape the language we use, the categories we think in, the boundaries of what feels reasonable. In other words, what thinkers like Max Weber and later Alasdair MacIntyre would recognize as the deeper structure of belief, not always through force, but through framing, through explanation, through justification. And then Rothbard makes his most important observation. There is one condition under which all of this accelerates: war. In times of peace there are limits, debate, resistance, but in war those limits begin to dissolve, and as Rothbard puts it, in war the state really comes into its own. In war, emergency measures are introduced, power is centralized, decisions are accelerated, and actions that would once be unthinkable become necessary. At first, these changes are presented as temporary, justified by necessity, framed as survival, but Rothbard warns, war does not simply pass, it leaves behind something else: structures, systems, justifications that no longer depend on the emergency that created them. Because every major war leaves expanded taxation, expanded bureaucracy, expanded surveillance, expanded authority, and as he notes, war brings with it a permanent legacy of increased burdens upon society. After the war ends, there is often a belief that things will return to normal, but they rarely do. The baseline has shifted, and what once required justification no longer does. And this reveals a pattern. War is not just something that the state engages in. It is something that reshapes the state itself. It alters its reach, its scope, its limits, and this is not just theoretical. It is a pattern that repeats across modern history. Now this raises a difficult question. A nation has the right to defend itself, but defense has a boundary, and war has a tendency to move beyond it, because once that line is crossed, it becomes harder to define. This is why thinkers like Rothbard were skeptical of intervention. not because nothing matters beyond a state's borders, but because once war moves beyond direct defense, the limits become unstable, and historically they do not return easily. The danger is not only losing a war, it is what a society becomes while fighting one. Because war does not just mobilize resources, it reorganizes power, and the people who live under it must reorganize their lives around it. This leads to a deeper realization. War is not only a response to external threats, it is also a mechanism through which internal power expands, and once expanded, it seeks to justify its own continuation. Rothbard's argument is not that all war is avoidable, or that defense is illegitimate. It is a warning about what follows, that the structures created at war outlast the reasons it began. And so the question becomes not only whether a war is justified, but whether it can remain limited, or whether it will begin to exceed the very reasons it was justified. Because if it cannot, then the cost of war is not confined to the battlefield. It is written into the structure of the society itself. In the end, the danger is not only that power expands. History suggests that it will. The real question is whether it remains limited, because once limits begin to shift, they rarely return to where they once were before. And if war accelerates that process, then the question is not only how wars are fought, but whether the society that emerges afterward is the same one that entered it. I'll see you in the next episode.